this opportunity to speak to the members of this chamber through you. Madam President, I'm sure you are looking at me and asking, why is the gentleman from Fitchburg filed an amendment on the Cape Cod Commission? And the answer to that question is very simple, Madam President. That is, it was a constituent request. And I see my friend and colleague, the gentleman from the Cape and Islands, is in the room here today, well rested from his trip to California, and I'm sure he is eager to speak on this amendment, and I look forward to hearing his remarks. Thank you.
The Senator from the Cape and the Islands, Mr. Cyr.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise in opposition to Amendment 13. I appreciate that my friend from Fitchburg has asked me to explain the amendment, and I understand that his aim in filing the amendment was to respond to a constituent. His actions are well-intentioned. I appreciate his friendship. For full disclosure, I was in California for a friend's wedding. But I want to share with you all why this amendment would be so damaging if passed. And I'd like to reflect on the attitudes that have brought us here yet again, where money and power are playing out on the peninsula I represent. Regrettably, this isn't the first time somebody has tried to slip in an amendment to change the rules of Cape Cod for the benefit of the rich and entitled. The Cape Cod Commission was established under an act by this body in the legislature in 1989, and what it does is assists all 15 communities in Barnstable County with regional planning, economic development, and land use regulation under the 15 towns in the county. Under the act, any project over 10,000 square feet automatically must go to the Commission for approval. Towns have the ability to make discretionary referrals to the Commission for projects that are under 10,000 square feet. Through these provisions, the Cape Cod Commission has been essential to preserving Old Cape Cod, the destination you all know and love. The agency is really key to stewarding smart development that meets our region's needs while safeguarding our character and our natural beauty and our fragile ecosystem. But the Cape Cod Commission does more than adjudicate land use in the region. The Commission was a vital partner that helped lead the hard work to craft a roadmap to Cape Cod's $4 billion wastewater problem. And the agency is now setting off on a public process on looking at how the region can address climate disruption via planning and land use in a collective fashion, the very work that we want municipalities to undertake so we can begin to make the very hard choices that climate disruption will force us to make. What this amendment proposes to do is to eliminate the ability of the Cape Cod Commission to have the powers to review certain development projects under 10,000 square feet within Barnstable County if they're asked to do so by the municipality.
Madam President?
Worcester, Mr. Eldridge.
Excuse me, Madam President, I'm having trouble hearing the gentleman from Truro speak.
Okay, would all members and guests please hold back their conversations? The Senator from Middlesex and Worcester, who sits 2 seats away from the gentleman who is speaking, is having trouble. So could everybody please, if you feel like you need to talk, please step outside. The Senator from the Cape and the Islands.
Thank you, Madam President. The process I was describing is called discretionary review, and it's worked well in Cape Cod for 3 decades. Several dozen discretionary review applications have been appropriately dealt with in recent years by the Cape Cod Commission. This process provides a real cost savings to towns who don't necessarily have the in-house resources to do so. I have a few examples of what this discretionary review is. I'll mention a few of them. One in 2017, a project in Eastham that proposed a 9,100 square foot Dollar General store, referred by the Eastham Board of Selectmen to the Cape Cod Commission. In 2019, on Route 28 in Harwich, the proposal for a 7,400 square foot retail store, the Planning Board referring that to the Cape Cod Commission for assistance. In 2019, actually this year, the Marchant House was, in Hyannisport was referred to the Commission. It proposed demolition of a 200-year-old building. These are some of the decisions that the Commission helps communities make. Why is this so key? Because our towns on Cape Cod are by and large small. Most planning departments only have 1 or 2 employees. And so the Cape Cod Commission provides an essential service by managing these applications for new construction and development. And this is particularly key to assess environmental impacts, which are pretty critical on our peninsula given our fragile ecosystem and environment. Now, I've been serving in the Senate. This is my 3rd year. No one has ever brought to my attention a complaint regarding this policy, not one complaint on this policy. Most towns on Cape Cod don't have the resources to conduct analysis and complicated development proposals, and so fortunately they're able to rely on the commission. Yet, if this amendment were passed, it would add significant cost to towns and provide advantage to developers, which we have learned is the very intent of the individual who asked that it be filed. As the Cape Cod Times has reported today, we now know that this amendment was filed at the request of a wealthy real estate developer from central Massachusetts. I'm not going to get into the details. Folks can read the story for themselves, and I encourage you to read the story. It's quite a read. I'm not going to opine on why this individual didn't approach me, didn't approach my colleague from Plymouth and Barnstable about this issue, except to say that anyone who spent more than 3 minutes working with the Cape and Islands delegation knows we work in a bipartisan and collaborative fashion, and that an influential individual positioning colleagues who live 100 miles from the region that this amendment is about is insulting to both my friend from Fitchburg and the members of the Cape and Islands delegation who work so hard for the region. But what I do want to talk about is how this individual's aims are not a one-off or an aberration, but they're part of a broader assault that the Cape and Islands region has been under for decades. This case shows the corrosive elements of our politics, where the well-heeled and moneyed use their largesse to get attention of elected officials, curry favor, and advance their agenda, all while circumventing local control with a disregard for those of us who make our lives year-round in this special place. Fortunately, in Massachusetts, we have local control. Some of the most vibrant direct democracy that exists in the world exists in the 351 cities and towns here in Massachusetts. However, planning boards, zoning boards, select boards, and town staff are all under assault, where hired lawyers and lobbyists work to advance their clients' entitled vision of Cape Cod, Martha's Vineyard, and Nantucket. Again, this is part of a pattern, and I'd like to share some of the most egregious examples. On Nantucket, the CEO of a large multinational bank hired lobbyists and lawyers to prevent the Nantucket Land Bank from constructing a very modest dorm-style housing unit for seasonal workers. Why do they need this unit, this housing unit? Because they can't attract workers because of the astronomical cost of housing on the island because of a real estate market that is driven by second, third, and fourth homeowners. And this was done so against the will of the local government and year-round neighbors. And now on Nantucket, there's a rumor of a multi-billionaire who is committed to fund a campaign to the tune of $2 million every year for 5 years to halt the development of affordable housing, an endeavor with racist undertones, given the island's housing needs are primarily for an immigrant workforce that has come to the island to mow lawns, to wait on tables, and to serve the uber-rich. In Wellfleet, a wealthy homeowner who owns a home that was preposterously built on a coastal dune is using revetments to protect his property at the serious objection of the town, while causing significant damage to his neighbors and the surrounding coastal area. Why he's able to get away with it? Because he has an ability to fund endless litigation. I'm reminded of the out-of-towners who bought and bulldozed a modest ranch home at Ryder Beach in Truro, the beach that's my family's favorite beach, the beach that my parents, if they're watching this, are going to kill me for talking about, because I don't want anyone to know about it. The town basically said the house was of such a size that it shouldn't be built on a coastal dune. Coastal dunes move, right? But these folks defied the town, they built it anyway, and they fought it in court, and now the town basically couldn't keep pace, and they settled. There's another home in Truro called the Klein House that you can read about. Same thing, over 8,000 square feet of a home. So now there are these monstrosities that hulk over our beaches and our public spaces, conspicuous displays of asphalt shingles and too much money and bad taste. And here on Beacon Hill, before my time, a former legislator from a district north of Boston quietly passed an amendment attempted to pass an amendment into the state budget at the request of a wealthy Mashpee summer resident who wanted to bar the cultivation of oysters near his property because it apparently marred his seaside view, all without notifying or consulting members of the Cape and Islands legislative delegation. Yet another attempt to slip in legislative change that would benefit an individual over the good of the community. I'm reminded, again in this instance, that it was Seaside's second and third homeowners, summer residents from both sides of the aisle, Kochs and Kennedys, who teamed up to defeat an offshore wind farm in Nantucket Sound, and in effect delayed viable ocean-based wind generation in Massachusetts by a decade. Many of you have spoke to me recently about this wonderful article in the Boston Globe highlighting that Cape Cod really is at the edge of a warming world. How hypocritical that the short-term preservation of use shed stalled a substantive effort to wean us from fossil fuels, efforts we desperately need in a place where the waters are rising faster than most anywhere else in the world. And it's not just rising tides that we're up against on Cape Cod and Martha's Vineyard on Nantucket. Our population is decreasing at rather alarming rates. Why? Because of housing. Simply put, working people can't afford to rent or buy a home in the region. Why? Because the second, third, fourth homeowner market is driving up the cost of housing astronomically. In my hometown of Truro, we're in an ethical dilemma. The town is. There's a dilapidated motel that is in violation of numerous health and safety codes. But it's also home to about 50 or 55 residents, all of whom are working class, most of whom are Jamaican immigrants who are here legally. The landlord is refusing to make any of these upgrades and is essentially daring the town to either take matters to court or to evict the people who have nowhere else to go. But where will these 50 residents go if this motel unit is shut down? So, Madam President, and I appreciate the time, I know I'm going on, but it makes me really angry that some people have the audacity to think that they can bend the rules to their favor. Something isn't right in a society where a very few have the means to stack the deck to their advantage in nearly every arena. What keeps Cape Cod special, what keeps us unique and beautiful and frankly a competitive destination are the qualities that the Cape Cod Commission protects. Large retail chains with poor employment practices or McMansions that mar the landscape, they not only sort of erode the character, but they undercut the really fragile footing for us locals who make our lives on Land's End. We the people who wait on you, who mow your lawns, who make your beds when you visit us in July and August, we are being left out and we're being pushed out. We are losing our most valuable human asset, which is human capital. And regrettably, Cape Codders, particularly of my generation and the one after mine, who want to make our lives in this special place, regrettably, we're finding it harder and harder to make it work. And they don't have funds, and we don't have funds for lobbyists and lawyers. Fortunately, I'd like to think that they have me. They have my colleagues in the House, certainly my colleague from Plymouth and Barnstable, my colleagues in the House from Brewster, from Provincetown, from Sandwich, from Woods Hole, from East Falmouth. And we will not stand for those who want to bend the rules in our region. So, Madam President, I hope the amendment is not adopted. Thank you.
Thank you. The question comes on adoption of this amendment. All those in the senator from Worcester and Middlesex, Mr. Tran.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you to my friend and colleague, the gentleman from the Cape and Islands, for his input. In light of his remarks, Madam President, I would like to ask for unanimous consent to withdraw.
Senator from Worcester and Middlesex, Mr. Tran, asks for unanimous consent to withdraw this amendment. Is there an objection? The chair hears none. So done. So ordered.